Aaron, delighted to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
First question. What's the best thing that Donald Trump has done for the U.S. and Europe in his new presidency?
Well, I definitely think that if you look at the first Trump term, a lot of Europeans kind of maybe thought that this was a temporary thing and that, we were returning to normalcy with Joe Biden. But now it kind of looks that maybe Joe Biden was the exception and that it's been hammered home even more clear that Europe needs to take a bigger responsibility for its own security and just basically build up its resilience across the board. I mean, we're talking not just spending on on NATO and on their own defense, but also when it comes to energy security, lack of growth, all these other things. This is really a kind of a wake-up call that Europe really needed.
Now, you're the director of the Atlantic Council's Warsaw office, and Poland, in some ways, has been the poster child for exactly what you're talking about.
Very much so, but also, unfortunately, in the eyes of many Western Europeans, the East-West divide is still there, where many of the leaders in the West sometimes think that countries like Poland and Central and Eastern Europe are still like the others. For a long time, when Poland raised the issue of Russia being a threat to European security, it was often sometimes brushed aside and said that this was an irrational fear or something like that, which begs the question, like, why would the countries who have more experience of Russia know less? It would rather be the other way around. Poland, as a country that has a lot of experience with Russia, knew exactly what the Russians were doing and knew the need to be well prepared. And again, not just in terms of spending on defense, but on the energy side, on the societal resilience side, and so on.
Well, one of the remarkable things about Poland has been its economic prowess. Can you tell our listeners a little about that?
Well, yeah, no, Poland, I mean, if you look at it, it's very similar to the economic development of South Korea. We often refer to South Korea as a sort of a tiger economy, and Poland is very much the same thing. It has literally quadrupled its GDP per capita since communism was thrown off in '89. It's virtually, with the exception of a few minor slumps here and there during the 2008 economic crisis and also in after the first year of the open Russian aggression on Ukraine, it's basically been just an uphill climb of growth. And still today, and it is, I think it's the prognosis says that it's going to be the country in Europe with some of the highest growth even this year.
Europe in general has had trouble with growth. Why is it the case that Poland is an exception? Is it entrepreneurship, free market capitalism, low taxes, or a combination?
It's a combination, pretty much, of all of these. I mean, the Polish taxes are not, I mean, they're low in terms of it's taxing like new small business. They've particularly made an effort in making sure that starting up a company in Poland is fairly easy to do. It's also a pretty big country by European standards. It's 40 million people, so it is big enough to sort of sustain itself in many ways. But the European funds have been smartly used to develop infrastructure. When the privatization was done in the early 90s, it was very much like, yes, there was shock therapy, but with a focus on therapy. Where people often say that Poland did therapy, Russia did shock. Unfortunately, Ukraine didn't do anything at all, which is why we are sort of where we are. If you look at a graph of Poland and Ukraine in '91, they are basically on the same level. Ukraine is actually slightly above because it had more heavy industry, and now Poland is way ahead of them. So that shows, again, displays the difference of joining, for example, the European Union, joining NATO versus not doing it.
What impact has the Russian invasion of Ukraine had specifically on Poland?
Oh, huge. I mean, it's been it's basically been kind of a sign of vindication in many ways that what Poland has been talking about has unfortunately finally been proven true. There are a few people in Europe now who deny the threat from Russia. There are a few notable exceptions, but in general, more and more Europeans get it. If anything, it has been sort of a yet another, how would one put it? Yet another sign of the fact that there are certain things in politics and in society that are simply there needs to be unity on. I mean, Polish the political scene is highly polarized. But the two main political forces, even though they strongly dislike each other, are united on the issue of, Russia is a threat. Ukraine needs to be supported. America is a friend. NATO is important, and so on. So it has very much been although that was of course the case before as well. But it has also again tried, one could say, encouraged sort of the Poles to do what they do best, which is there was a huge societal mobilization for the sake of the Ukrainians. It was not just the politicians. It was also ordinary people who came to the train stations, took Ukrainians into their homes, gave them food. Poland is a country that often in crisis shows its best sides. When it is on a mission, it is at its best. I would say that in that sense, Poland is very similar to the United States.
How has the war in Ukraine impacted Polish military plans, including building up the army?
Well, the military buildup was something that Poland started with even before the war because they knew where things were heading. The decisions to increase defense spending came long before that. Right now, Poland is approaching 5% of GDP when it comes to military spending. But with the war plans, they have been closely following what the developments in Ukraine. And for example, noticed what's been happening lately, that the war has sort of transformed from a artillery war into a drone war mainly. And the Poles are now building one of the largest drone producing factories in Europe.
And that is in fact to the advantage of both Poland and Ukraine, isn't it? Because what Russia can amass is sheer manpower and artillery.
Very much so. And the drone technology that the Ukrainians are developing right now is the best in the world. We remember from the beginning of the war when everyone was talking about Bayraktars and Shaheeds and all that kind of stuff. I mean, right now what the Ukrainians are making is some of the best stuff that exists. And the Poles are really learning from that by working close with the Ukrainians, making sure that experiences is shared when Ukrainians come to train, for example, with Western forces in Poland and in other places. It's often the Western Europeans that are learning also from them. So it's a win-win situation.
Now, I know there have been very close ties between Poland and Ukraine. What explains the Polish reluctance to actually station troops inside Ukraine as part of a peacemaking deal?
Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a presidential election in Poland coming up now, round one on May 18th, and then the second round, most likely a second round if nobody gets over 50% on June 1. I mean, one thing, the Poles have been building up this army, as we mentioned before. It's going to be one of the largest armies in Europe, the third largest army in NATO after US and Turkey. The combined fleet of tanks, once all the tanks are delivered, is going to be greater than what the British, the Germans, and the French have combined, which is pretty impressive. What needs to be remembered, though, is unlike Britain, France, and Germany, Poland is a frontline state. They share a border with Russia to the northeast in Kaliningrad. They have a long border with Belarus, which is in effect a Russian satrapy, and the Belarusians have been conducting a form of hybrid warfare where they try to send these migrants across the border into Poland. They pick up migrants from Middle Eastern and African states. They fly them to Belarus and they tell them to cross the border because if they get into Poland, they will be in the European Union. So it's kind of a way to sort of try to destabilize Polish society. It hasn't worked because the Poles have built a barrier, reinforced the border, but that takes military resources. And of course, then in the direct southeast, there is Ukraine. So as a frontline state, Poland simply has to commit a large part of its army to the defense of its own borders. Now, I happen to personally think that it is a mistake from Poland to categorically rule that out. I think that this is something we may see a change after the presidential election. This has to do with the fact that the current Polish prime minister is banking a lot on having the candidate of his party to win the election, and the far right in Poland. There is a far right in Poland, which is not necessarily pro-Russian, but you could call it mainly anti-Ukrainian, which is kind of trying to, ferment dissatisfaction on that. I mean, even if the Polish society have been extremely generous with Ukraine and with Ukrainian refugees, there is also a form of fatigue there as well, mainly having to do with refugee numbers and stuff like that. As I said, I happen to think it's a mistake for Poles to categorically rule that out in advance. But there are, like I said, I think that might change. But there are also other things that the Poles are doing. I mean, of course, all of the aid comes through Rzeszów. There is the matter of perhaps, for example, sending Polish troops maybe to the Baltic states in order to reveal British and French and German. And there is the matter of historical sensitivities. I mean, a large part of what is Western Ukraine used to be part of Poland. And experts differ on this matter, but some believe that having Polish troops stationed in Ukraine could perhaps still be a sensitive issue as opposed to Western European ones. I personally don't agree with that, but again, there are smart people who make that claim.
That's an interesting territorial question because, of course, Poland's borders were shifted west after World War II.
And Poland does not make any territorial claims on Ukraine,
Right.
but again, these are historical traumas, let's put it that way.
Do you think Hungary does have territorial aspirations on Ukraine and the Carpathian Mountains?
Well, they certainly behave that way. Let's put it this way. For example, I remember a couple of years ago, Hungarian diplomat, tweeted at a Polish diplomat during Poland's National Day that we should meet on a common Polish-Hungarian border. And I'm like, so where exactly is that? I mean, in Ukraine then, or what? This is very strange if you think about it, because the Hungarian government says that Ukraine should not be allowed to join the European Union. Well, if you're concerned about a Hungarian minority in Ukraine, then obviously you would want Ukraine to join the European Union, because the European Union has very clear rules for how minorities are to be treated. Why do you think that a Hungarian minority would be better off in the Ukraine that's destroyed or dominated by Russia? Like, does Russia have a good track record of treating minorities? No. So what's the thinking there? Unless, of course, there's this sort of idea that should Ukraine fall, then the Hungarians can reclaim that part of the country. I don't know, but it's a crazy thought, because literally every single country in Central and Eastern Europe, not just Poland or Hungary, has some sort of historical territorial dispute. I mean, one of the great sort of almost forgotten successes of NATO expansion was that we shut all those things down. Because when all those countries were in NATO, then the thought of them going to war with each other is unthinkable. And also there is common security. But there are certain places, certain countries where those kinds of sentiments are being fueled more than others. Hungary is one of them. In Poland, people maybe have the map of the old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which included Ukraine and Belarus and the Baltic states and parts of Russia and all that. But in Poland, that's sort of a historical curiosity, right? If you go to Budapest, like literally every Tom, Dick, and Jerry is walking, not everybody, but a lot of people are walking around with these, old maps of Hungary from before World War I. A barista would wear, a little patch with that. So it's taking it a little too far. Now, granted, Poland and Hungary are different because Poland was officially on the winning side in all of the wars, officially, in practice, especially after World War II. But Hungary was sort of on the losing side every time. And there's a lot more historical Hungarian territory that's in other countries compared to what it is in Poland. So there's a difference there. But I'm highly critical of the way the Orban government has been playing on these sentiments, because, again, what they should do is argue then for Ukraine to join the European Union, because that will be a better situation for the Hungarian minority.
How do you think the Trump administration is dealing with NATO right now and Poland? Are you optimistic?
Well, it's good. I know Pete Hegseth's trip to Poland went very well in Poland, and he himself has referred to Poland as the model ally, saying that if all the European countries did what Poland is doing, spending that much on defense, taking it seriously, buying American weapons and all that, maybe we would have had less problems. Now, that is true. However, the Poles also understand that it's not just about that, but it's also about stopping the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Because if we don't do that, then we've just increased the chances of a war with Russia and NATO. We haven't decreased it, we've increased it. I'm not a fan of dictators, but in the case of Vladimir Putin, the fact that he's been around for 25 years, there's a positive to that insofar that we kind of know how the guy operates at this point. And we have seen what happens when you let him get away with aggression. There's more aggression, not less. So believing that we can somehow make it stop by handing him over parts of Ukraine, that's not going to do the trick. The Trump sort of plan, as it begun, with sort of injecting some new thinking into that, there was a lot of good stuff in there, like the basis of saying that, well, we can't retake all the territories that are occupied, may not be able to be retaken right now, so we'll sort of treat it the way that we did with East-West Germany, or the Baltic states in the Soviet Union, sort of accept the control there but not acknowledge it. Make sure that there are European troops there. Again, the bases are good, that Europeans need to take a bigger responsibility for European security, so defending Europe will be with European troops. But there has to be an American component there, and a sort of a backstop, which is what I think Marco Rubio mentioned during his speech to the State Department, not in the context of Ukraine, but saying that European security will be handled by Europeans, and then America is there as a backstop. And there are two reasons for that. One of them is that there are certain capabilities that only America has. That is something like, for example, intelligence, satellites, right? Knowing where the targets are, the deep striking, air defenses, and things like that. So again, there is no need for a big American footprint, but there has to be American component. That's one thing with the capabilities. And the other thing is that Russia does not want to go to war with us, because they know that they don't stand a chance against the United States. And you have to, that doesn't mean that you want to go to war with Russia. You don't, but you have to use that to your advantage. We are the ones who set the red lines, because we're the superpower, not them. So we tell them that we're just going to do this because we're going to do it, and you're just going to have to take it. That's the peace through strength approach.
Now, there's a lot of talk in Europe, Germany, Poland, about going nuclear. That is, possessing a nuclear weapon. How likely do you think that is?
Well, I would say the more, an organization like NATO. So again, President Trump is right when he says that the European countries need to spend more on their defense. But bottom line is that an organization like NATO works if there is trust. If there's starting to be a lack of trust in the United States as being in NATO and not treating it simply as a transactional agreement, because that's not what it is, then you've just increased the chance of going nuclear. The arrangement that we put together worked because we said that we are there, as again with the nukes, with the backstop. But right now there is a situation where a lot of Europeans are losing trust in the leadership of the United States, because it sounds like that we're gonna again walk away from this war, which there is no reason to walk away from it. We're the stronger side. The Russians are not succeeding. In 2024, they managed to take 1% of Ukrainian territory at the loss of about 400,000 troops. That's not success. This idea that somehow they're unstoppable, that's nonsense. You can
I think they've been exposed as a weak force.
Absolutely. But you have to capitalize on that then. They have been exposed as a weak force, but that's why we have to be proactive, right? I like the way that the French are talking when they're saying, we don't need Russia's permission for putting in troops. Exactly. Now, Macron is the kind of guy who says a lot of things and, doesn't always end up doing them. But step one, for too long in this war, we have been reacting to what the Russians have been doing. We have to be proactive. We have to take a step forward here. Yes, the Russians have been exposed, and it's high time that we capitalize on that. Because again, if you defeat Russia and Ukraine, you have just secured the peace in Europe for a very long time. If you fail, you've just increased the chance of a wider war. You have not decreased it. We've seen this movie before. Aggressive dictators, you start giving them stuff, they get more aggressive.
Well, Mr. Putin has systematically, gone after one country after the other: Chechnya, Georgia, Crimea, and now the Ukraine itself. He does seem to get hungrier as he marches on.
Yeah, well, and again, we've seen this movie happening before. It's nothing new. Putin has said many times he wants to reconstitute the Russian Empire as it was. That doesn't mean exactly the same borders. It doesn't necessarily mean conquering all of Ukraine. it means conquering as much territory as he wants to create this land bridge, this Novorossiya thing, and then turning the rest of Ukraine into essentially something like Belarus. This is totally unacceptable to Ukrainians. This should be completely unacceptable to us. Why would we want... Ukraine is one of the, if not the largest country in Europe in terms of territory, if you don't count Russia. Like, why would we want a country that's hostile to us, Russia, take over that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Where are we going to get our rare earth minerals from? China? No, we can get them from Ukraine, but as a fair deal, not as a colonial deal. That's not going to fly. So, and if we get this wrong, we lose the trust and the support of the Europeans. And if we want to get things done in Asia with China, we need the European support. It's much better to go up. It doesn't make any sense to me to go up against the Chinese with, 340 million Americans against 1.5 billion without the Europeans, right? Why would we want to do that? Our combined economic strength, US and Europe together, is much greater than China's.
Also, for the Middle East, we can use the help of the Europeans
absolutely,
as well.
Absolutely. And again, the Europeans have been with us because they've seen us as a reliable partner. But right now, there's a hot war in Europe. So if that isn't handled properly, the Europeans are going to be focused on that. They're not going to be interested in helping us in all these other parts of the world if we do not handle that thing properly. And also, if we step away from that, from stopping Russia and Ukraine, I mean, there is a pretty big chance that the Europeans are not going to turn to the only other great power that they can feel, that they think can reign in Russia, and that would be China. So we've just shot ourselves in the foot if we do that. I don't understand this whole talk of reverse Kissinger. I mean, this is fantasy. The European economy is 15 times the size of the Russians, right? Why would we want to be friends with Russia and losing Europe? Doesn't make any sense. Also, Henry Kissinger, when we talk about what Henry Kissinger did in terms of Russia and China, I mean, we're not talking about who built the pyramids, right? We're talking about something that happened roughly 50 years ago. It's not hard to figure that out. It's not that the relationship between Russia and China was close, and in came Henry Kissinger and wrecked the whole thing. No, the Russians and the Chinese were on very bad terms at that time, and we simply exploited it. Right now, the Russians and Chinese are working very tightly together. The Russians are buying dual-use products from the Chinese, like a washing machine or whatever, that you can take out the electronics and shove it into a tank and whatever. And the Chinese are buying oil from the Russians. And they're doing this because they want to make the world safe for authoritarian powers. So it makes perfect sense to them. So we're not gonna get Russia away from China, and we don't have to, because again, with the Europeans, the Asian allies, throw in the Middle Eastern allies in there, the transatlantic alliance, the Western partnership, is way stronger than even Russia and China combined. So that will be the proper approach. And also, if you let Russia be China's vassal for a while, the Russians are going to figure out that that's not a very nice place to be in. And so they might finally come to their senses, and they might come to us and try to work something out. And then you can, negotiate that as much as you want. But you only negotiate with Russia from a strong position, never from a weak position. If you do that, you're wasting your time.
Final question. You alluded earlier to the Polish elections, 2 rounds. Mm-hmm. Tell us why they're significant and what you think is going to happen.
Right. Well, so the Polish president, unlike many other European countries, the role of the Polish president is not like super clear. It's not a presidential system. Like, it's not like the French one, but it's also not like the German one, where the president has no power. It's sort of somewhere in between. The president does have a lot to say in foreign policy in Poland, and he can also veto laws in the passed through parliament. So it's significant because in 2003, the current Polish government won election against the PiS government, which was kind of nationalist conservative, you can say, whereas the current Polish government is center-right by Polish standards, which by American standards means that it's essentially liberal Republican, you can call it that. But they don't control the presidency. That's still in the hands of PiS. So a lot of their a lot of their legal or their legislative agenda has been stuck in parliament because they can't override a presidential veto. So if they do win, if the candidate of the current ruling coalition, a guy called Rafał Trzaskowski, who is now the mayor of Warsaw, he's also lived in the United States, speaks very good English, has very good contacts in the U.S., used to be deputy minister of the European Union and also a member of the European Parliament, so he does have international experience. If he wins, then you can expect more political stability in Poland. If the peace candidate wins, then we're sort of back at where we were, where there's gridlock in the Polish political system. That increases the chances for further polarization, and it may lead to yet another, maybe new elections. In effect, Poland has been in a perpetual election cycle since October 23, because after that they had local elections, European Parliament elections, and now presidential elections. So it's kind of like there might be a little bit of election fatigue. Also, if you have Rafał Trzaskowski coming in, you will have an interesting trio in the top brass of the Polish leadership when it comes to foreign policy. Donald Tusk, the prime minister, who is very experienced in the European Union.
And very tough on Russia.
They're all tough on Russia. Radoslaw Sikorski, the foreign minister, who also has, knows a lot about the United States, very tough on Russia. And Rafał Trzaskowski, again, mayor of Warsaw, but also with certain foreign policy experience in the presidential palace. That's an interesting trio of for experienced foreign policy voices that also are on the right side when it comes to Russia and Ukraine.
Aaron, thank you.
Thank you so much.